Hey friends, today I am talking about language around food, specifically for kiddos who are dealing with picky eating. So if you have a picky eater at home, this video is definitely for you. First, I just want to say picky eating can be really difficult and overwhelming, both for a child and a parent. And I think more so for parents, it can be incredibly stressful, especially if you're concerned about your child's intake and their growth and worried if they're eating enough to support their growth and development. And that can be hard with picky eating. And sometimes we say things to our kids in order to encourage them to eat. But what can happen is it can sometimes come out as pressure or feel like pressure for a child to actually eat. So, what I mean, I'm going to give you some specific phrases and examples of this, but sometimes we unintentionally make things more difficult for our kids at mealtime, and that is by creating pressure for them to eat. And sometimes that's coming from our own fear and stress and anxiety around food and our kids, like we just have the best intentions. And as parents, we want our kids to eat, we want them to, be healthy. And so, sometimes we may say things, again, that are well-intentioned, but that can be interpreted as pressure, or our kids may interpret it as feeling pressured to eat. And I'm going to explain more about why that can be tricky, especially for a picky eater. But first, let me give you some examples of this. So, saying phrases like, this is so healthy for you, or this is so good for you, you should try some, or if you eat some of this, it's going to help you grow, it's going to help you get big and strong. Or my personal favorite that I grew up hearing all the time, and that is, there's other people in the world who are starving, so, that would be so grateful to have the food that you have. So you should eat it. We don't want to waste our food. Or another one might be, something along the lines of, this is what we're having for dinner and there's not going to be any other food after this. So if you're hungry, you need to eat right now. And again, if you have said any of these things, this is not intended to create any shame around this. This is just to kind of bring awareness of the conversations that we may have with our kids around food, especially for kids who may be dealing with picky eating. So what happens is we are trying to just get our kids to eat, right? And especially with picky eating, you might trying to be persuading or encouraging your child to eat. But persuasion through the form of verbal cues, like through some of the statements that I just shared, is pressure. And when kids feel pressured to eat, what the research shows is that they're more likely to develop aversions to the food that you're trying to get them to eat or eating in general, or they may be less likely to eat what they need, especially over the course of time. So in the moment, it may feel like it's a good thing to try to persuade and encourage our child to eat, especially through verbal cues. So I'm talking specifically around language, like the language that we're saying to them to try to get them to eat. But remember that any type of persuasion can feel like pressure to your child, and it can actually make it harder for them to eat. And you can see where this could potentially get tricky for a child who may be already more selective or have sensory sensitivities with food, or, who's just having a harder time at meals. The things that we say can be so influential in terms of how they feel about food and their bodies. So we want to be really careful about the things that we're saying and ask ourselves, like really step back and ask ourselves, like, are these things being said with this hidden agenda of trying to get our child to eat more or to eat certain foods? And the other thing to be aware of is just how kids interpret information. So I think we have this understanding or this perception that we need to be educating our kids about nutrition or about food or about what's good or what's bad. And there is a lot of overwhelming information out there, especially for parents. But what I want you to understand here is that kids don't really understand nutrition concepts. Like, nutrition concepts are kind of abstract for them, and they may not really get the nuances involved with nutrition and health. And so when we tell a child, like, this is healthy for you, they don't really understand what that means, and it can actually make food more polarizing for them. And that can create just more chaos and confusion for them around food and eating. Remember that your child has those innate abilities to self-regulate what they need, even if you're dealing with a picky eater. So what we want to focus on to help support our kids and to help them build a positive relationship with all foods is creating positive mealtime experiences. That should be kind of our main goal that we're focusing on, not getting them to eat. And so when we can step back and see that big picture, I think that can help us just analyze and assess our language with them a little bit more to see, like, are we helping, supporting them in creating positive mealtime experiences, or are we creating more pressure by trying to persuade them to eat through the statements or the comments that we might be saying? So one thing I try to encourage parents with is this little mantra, and that is serve food in silence. And what I mean by that is, don't feel inclined to talk to your child about the food itself at meal times, because sometimes that can make it more stressful, both for kids and for parents. And I just try to encourage parents, serve the food and then kind of put the blinders up and talk to your child about anything but the food. So talk about their day, talk about things that they're interested in. And what you're going to find is that helps them feel more relaxed and doesn't make them feel pressured to eat. And they're naturally going to explore food on a timeline that feels safer for them. So keep that in mind. Other things that help kind of take the pressure off of kids is saying things like, you don't have to eat it. So where we might be inclined to kind of encourage or persuade our child to eat something, saying something kind of opposite of that, like, you don't have to eat it if you don't want to. I tell my kids that all the time. When I put something on the table and immediately they're like, oh, yuck, I don't want to eat that. I'm like, guess what? You don't have to eat it if you don't want to. And immediately that just puts the pressure off of them. And taking the pressure away from them is what's going to help create a more positive mealtime experience for them. One last thing that I want to encourage you with, I know that if you're dealing with picky eating, you may also be dealing with outside comments from well-meaning family members and friends, or even professionals who might feel like they want to give you some unsolicited advice or talk to you about your child and how they're eating. And so one thing I like to say to other people who may label your child as a picky eater, or who may be encouraging your child, like, hey, why don't you try this? Or you should eat this, or you should eat more. I like to interject and say something along the lines of, he is learning how to eat on his terms and he's doing great, but I appreciate your concern, and then changing the subject, because your child's eating doesn't need to become a focus for other people. And I know that a lot of people, again, out of really well-intentioned, feel the need to comment on how your kid may be eating, especially if you're dealing with picky eating. So I like to try to reframe it. Like, your child is not a picky eater. They are learning to eat. And reframing that in your mind, and then in the way that you speak about your child to other people, can really help you just focus on the big picture when it comes to your child. And remembering that language is so important. How we talk to our child about food can really set the stage for their own relationship with food and how they feel about eating and how they feel about their body. And we want them to know that they're safe. They're safe around food. They're safe to explore food on terms that feels comfortable for them without outside pressure from us or other people. And so changing the focus and the shift on how you think about that can help with this. So I hope this was helpful for you. I do have a new blog post that goes into this topic in a lot more detail. So if you're interested in learning more, be sure to check it out. I'll link it in the comments. And then I'd love to hear any questions that you have, or if there's any way I can help support you, be sure to comment below. And thank you as always for watching.